Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Let me start first of all with a long read article I've posted covering the coronavirus until yesterday, a situational report and a small market analysis attached to it. So if you just want to see one-click document, it's on Rich Wrap-Ups, it's on the front page. But I'll go through my normal podcast, and in it are most of the contents of that article. 2020 returns. This is from Charlie Bilello. Tesla up 91%. And I have to admit, I saw that short squeeze start, but I would never have believed we would have come up here, up 91% this year. Bitcoin up 41%, and that's been the preeminent flight to safety trade in many respects. Microsoft 18%, Amazon 16%, Google 13%, Apple 11%, so it's been a tech disruption story in 2020, as it has been for a number of years. NASDAQ 10%, long-term treasuries up 7%. That, of course, is all about the flight to safety. S&P up 5%, untroubled by the virus. Gold up 4%. China down 3%, copper down 7%, and oil down 15%, and I saw a report out of S&P which says if oil hits 40, then the Gulf will be at junk status, which is obviously the truth. When will gold go back to all-time highs? Still more than 16% below its all-time high of 1,895. Reached on September 2011. We're currently at 1582.75. I think it's going to have a great year, as I said on the 13th of January before the virus, when there was plenty of uncertainty already. I said, given the uncertainty I've outlined, gold looks well underpinned and might even have a banner year. Cross-asset year-to-date, this is from the Martyr. 27th of January, I was talking about how markets bought gold and G7 bonds as investors dived into safe havens, and I was talking about the potential of that move turning parabolic. 2nd of September last year, I was writing about the China EM frontier feedback loop, saying it had been positive for 20 years and had now undergone a trend reversal. And to wit, have a look at this, the crash in Chinese coal consumption versus the historical trend. That's from the market era as well. Let's have some home thoughts. Nothing is a lost cause to this guy. This is just incredible via Tennis TV. Isn't this beautiful? The interior of Debre Birhan Selassie in Gondar, Ethiopia. That's from Eastern Nile. With you, we could enjoy sunsets like this every day. That's from Visit Maldives. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. If you want people to like you, do not give them advice. Ask them for advice. Nassim Taleb. One of Istanbul's proudest icons, the Hagia Sophia. This is from Munir Kar, who's obviously visiting Istanbul, and I visited it many years ago. There's a weeping pillar in that church and now mosque, which has a long tradition and history behind it. And I advised Munir to go to the hammam because there is an extraordinary hammam Must be 400 or 500 years old, not far from the Blue Mosque, in fact. So how many lions have you seen together? Here about 24, a full pride of lions from Gir, that's via MP Parimal via Parveen Kaswan. Looks like a scene straight from a Hollywood action movie. Far from it. This is somewhere in northern Kenya. Machine versus beast. And then Samuel Kirosi alerted me to this tweet from G. Newman, 1979. Look where she is, right at the edge. And as Hunter S. Thompson said, there is no honest way to explain it, because the only people who really know it, where it is, are the ones who have gone over. This is a short video, the last will and testament of Soleimani. Oh dear God, it has been many years now since I was left behind a caravan. You know that I have never been able to forget them. The memories of them always echo, not in my mind, but in my heart and in my eyes with tears and sighs. I wrote about this on the 6th of January, the assassination. He said, when I see the children of the martyrs, I want to smell their scent and I lose myself. One type of paradise that men imagine is about streams, beautiful maidens, and lush landscape. But there is another kind of paradise, the battlefield, the front, he said, the lost paradise of the human beings. The supreme leader, who usually reserves his highest praise for fallen soldiers, has referred to Soleimani as a living martyr of the revolution. In the end, he drank the sweet syrup of martyrdom. Now let's go to the coronavirus. China reported a fall in the number of new coronavirus cases on Sunday, with a health official suggesting that intensive efforts to stop the spread of the disease were beginning to work. That's via Reuters. I've said in brackets, it's all good. Now, video for me, latest trends for the coronavirus. Rest of the world is now out of control. What he means is if you overlay the rest of the world versus China, you're seeing that the rest of the world is actually accelerating from a much lower base, of course. 3rd of February, I wrote about the coronavirus and its non-linearity and exponential risks. Reuters, this is Rover 829, the sickness now officially labeled COVID-19 has killed about 2% of those infected. Cases have spread faster than other respiratory viruses this century. And this is the point, the infection rate is extremely high. Now, we had this report that Xi Jinping actually knew about the virus in the first week of January, and that confirms what the University of Toronto researchers' model was saying, that the virus epidemic started 1 month earlier than commonly believed. You can't get up to that level of cases if the epidemic started in December, even if you push the reproduction high. Alamos National Laboratory, this is via Mark Andreessen, public service announcement. Have a read of that. And in the report, initially the basic reproductive number R0 was estimated to be 2.2 to 2.7. Here we provide a new estimate of this quantity. We collected extensive individual case reports and estimated key epidemiology parameters, including the incubation period. Integrating these estimates and high-resolution real-time human travel and infection data with mathematical models, we estimated that the number of infected individuals during the early epidemic doubled every 2.4 days, and the R0 value is likely to be between 4.7 and 6.6. The growth rate of the outbreak is estimated to be 0.29 per day, a much higher rate than two recent estimates. This growth rate corresponds to a doubling time of 2.4 days. We argue that the high R0 and a relatively short incubation period lead to the extremely rapid growth of the 2019 coronavirus outbreak as compared to the 2003 SARS epidemic, where R0 was estimated to be between 2.2 to 3.6. Results show that if as low as 20% of infected persons are asymptomatic and can transmit the virus, then even a 95% quarantine efficacy will not be able to contain the virus. That's the point I was making about viruses exhibiting non-linear and exponential characteristics. On Flickr, I came across images and B-roll related to the novel coronavirus, the visuals of it. Now, it took me back to William Burroughs, who I read in my teenage years, and he kind of frightened me. Smash the control images, smash the control machine. And I think a virus puts enormous pressure on China, which after all is a control machine. And as I said, a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine, in point of fact. With social media posts about the coronavirus being censored in China, here's a bit of cool protest art going around. That's from Stephen McDonnell. If you look closely here, you'll see references to China's tech companies, Huawei, Wechat, Alibaba. Also, hexi over the eyes means harmony. In China, if you've been censored, you've been harmonized. And as I said in a previous article, what is clear is that the CCP suppressed information until we reached a Groucho Marx "who you going to believe, me or your own eyes" moment. And that's because of the suppression of free speech. Did not allow that information to percolate to the top, or maybe it did. The FT is saying he knew much earlier. If it did, it was also suppressed at that point. And I return you to that essay by Professor Zhu Zhangrun, Viral Alarm When Fury Overcomes Fear. They now turn to rule over the people by means of what could be dubbed big data totalitarianism and WeChat terror, which is the control machine, which I'd written about when I wrote an article about Xi Jinping and his algorithmic control. In that article, Viral Alarm, he made a big deal about being personally this and personally that when meeting Dr. Tedros, personally commanding the response to the outbreak. And as I said, on the 7th of October, on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, and it was all that very grand celebration, and I concluded by saying the world in the 21st century exhibits viral wildfire and exponential characteristics and feedback loops, which only become obvious in hindsight. Little did I realize that such a thing might happen. In The Economist, when agents of the state fear no external checks and balances, it is rational for them to bury bad news right up until a crisis becomes too big to hide, a dynamic that builds instability into the way China is run. Dr. Li, there was nationwide soul-searching when the ophthalmologist told Chinese media days before his death on February 6th in Wuhan that silencing truth-tellers can make a country sick. I think there should be more than one voice in a healthy society. In the hour after Dr. Li's death, nearly 2 million Chinese shared or viewed a hashtag meaning I want freedom of speech before it was deleted by censors. Xinhua called Xi the commander of the people's war against the epidemic. To some readers, the martial title may sound stirring. Censorship is being tightened, ending a brief period of unusual liberty for social media users. The country's largest internet platforms have been placed under special supervision by cyber regulators with extra controls on anything resembling citizen journalism. Many have read the humiliating letter that police in Wuhan made him sign, agreeing that his truth-telling was in fact a lie that gravely disturbs social order. They can see how, when agents of the state fear no external checks and balances, it is rational for them to bury bad news until a crisis becomes too big to hide, a dynamic that builds instability into the way China is run. Of course, Hu Zhangrun, who published that rare public critique, which I've shown you, of President Xi Jinping, has now been barred from social media, and his friends have not been able to contact him for several days. He concluded in his article, "This may be the last piece I write." That piece, as I said, Viral Alarm When Fury Overcomes Fear, an essay by Xu Zhangrun. And as I said, a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. He said, I'll just take you a few quotes, "You will all be no better than the fields of garlic chives, giving yourself up to being harvested by the blade of power, time and time again. What is thriving, however, is all that ridiculous red culture, nauseating adulation that the system heaps on itself via shameless pro-party hacks who chirrup hosannas at every turn. A polity that is blatantly incapable of treating its own people properly can hardly be expected to treat the rest of the world well. Such places will only be able to find their assumed pulchritude reflected back at them in the mirror of their imperial self-regard." 27th of May, of course, Xi Jinping was made president for life, and he is on a pedestal, as I said then. Returning to the professor, the people are no longer fearful. Mass sentiment can be summed up in the line made famous in Bei Dao's 1976 poem, "I do not believe." Debasement is the password of the base, nobility the epitaph of the noble. See how the gilded sky is covered with the drifting, twisted shadows of the dead. The ice age is over now. Why is there ice everywhere? The Cape of Good Hope has been discovered. Why do 1,000 sails contest the Dead Sea? I came into this world bringing only paper, rope, a shadow, to proclaim before the judgment the voice that has been judged. Let me tell you, world, I do not believe. If 1,000 challenges lie beneath your feet, count me as number 1,001. I don't believe the sky is blue. I don't believe in thunder's echoes. I don't believe that dreams are false. I don't believe that death has no revenge. If the sea is destined to breach the dikes, let all the brackish water pour into my heart. If the land is destined to rise, let humanity choose a peak for existence again. A new conjunction and glimmering stars adorn the unobstructed sky now. They are the pictographs from 5,000 years. They are the watchful eyes of future generations. And that takes me to who you're going to believe, me or your own eyes. Looking at the dubious daily figures for the coronavirus deaths outside of Hubei and Wuhan, a more interesting statistic would be overall reported deaths, all causes across the country. Then moving on, staying with the professor, just as such a pipe dream seemed to capture people's imaginations, developments in Hong Kong and Taiwan showed how the periphery can suddenly throw the center off kilter. And I think that's an interesting point. You know, historically, we've seen often change comes from the periphery. Events in those places have been so dramatic, in fact, they may even offer a ray of hope, he wrote, for it is perhaps, only perhaps, that with such a path forward, one in which the periphery gradually influences the center and makes imaginable some kind of peaceful transition, that a particular Chinese way out of our present political conundrum may be found. Perhaps, too, the besieged city of Wuhan, beset as it is by crisis, may also prove to be a Jerusalem, a place of hope and peace, an old city proffering new hope. As I said previously, the Chinese dream has become a nightmare at the boundaries of the Han Empire. I also said then, without thinking of the virus, that Xi sees Hong Kong and Taiwan like a virus, and he's looking to impose a quarantine, just like he has imposed on Xinhua. In the Black Swan, Taleb discusses the risks of a virus spreading owing to the increased connectivity in the modern environment. Connectivity, he said, increases fat-tailoredness. Then there is a report with an unfortunate image, which everyone got upset with, but nevertheless, the report itself, which is assessing the spread risk of Wuhan novel coronavirus within and beyond China, January to April 2020, travel network-based modeling study. They estimated 59,912 air passengers, of which 834 had the virus, traveled from Wuhan to 382 cities outside of mainland China during the 2 weeks prior to Wuhan's lockdown. They looked at mobile phone and flight data of 60,000 of an estimated 5 million Wuhan residents who fled during the critical 2 weeks before the outbreak city was placed under lockdown. Have a look at that report. Now, this is interesting. Dave Greenwich, 57, the section in the box has never been seen before in any coronavirus and is comprised of several bat species. Because this didn't occur naturally, it's thought to be made in a lab. Now I saw a report by 2 Chinese scientists, Botao Xiao and Lei Xiao, basically confirming that in a way. The possible origins of the 2019 coronavirus. Bats carrying CoV ZC45 were originally found in Yunnan or Zhejiang province, both of which were more than 900 kilometers away from the seafood market. Bats were normally found to live in caves and trees, but the seafood market is in a densely populated district of Wuhan. The probability was very low for the bats to fly to the market. They're saying there was possible natural recombination or intermediate host of the coronavirus, yet little proof has been reported. Was there any other possible pathway? We screened the area around the seafood market and identified 2 laboratories conducting research on bat coronavirus. Within 280 meters from the market, there was the Wuhan Center for Disease Control and Prevention. WHCDC hosted animals in laboratories for research purpose, one of which specialized in pathogens collection and identification in one of their studies. Bats, including Rhinolophus affinis, were captured in Hubei province, and other 450 bats were captured in Zhejiang province. The expert in collection was noted in the author contributions. Moreover, he was broadcasted for collecting viruses on nationwide newspapers and websites in 2017. In an accident, he quarantined himself because bats peed on him. He was once thrilled for capturing a bat carrying a live tick. Surgery was performed on the caged animals, and the tissue samples were collected for DNA and RNA extraction and sequencing. The tissue samples and contaminated trashes were the source of the pathogens. There were only 280 meters from the seafood market. The WHCDC was also adjacent to the Union Hospital, where the first group of doctors were infected during this epidemic. It is plausible that the virus leaked around and some of them contaminated the initial patients in this epidemic, though solid proofs are needed in future study. The second laboratory was 12 kilometers from the seafood market and belonged to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The laboratory reported that Chinese horseshoe bats were natural reservoirs for the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus. The principal investigator participated in a project which generated a chimeric virus using a reverse genetic system and reported the potential for human emergence. A direct speculation was that SARS-CoV or its derivative might leak from the laboratory. In summary, somebody was entangled with the evolution of the coronavirus. In addition to origins of natural recombination and intermediate host, the killer coronavirus probably originated from a laboratory in Wuhan. So I think they're admitting to the connection now. Looking at the phylogenetic tree recently published, derived using all the full genome sequence, we see the 2019 nCoV virus does not have clear monophyletic support, given the bootstrap value of 75. And I'm not a scientist, but that's saying what it's saying. And I said, there's no doubt, I was quoting somebody, there is no doubt there is a novel sequence in this coronavirus. We confirm this via the sequence alignment, and here's the dot plot. James Lyons-Weiler has withdrawn a short video where he says the coronavirus is an artificial virus from the laboratory. Now, I came across an extraordinary article in Reddit, and I can't vouchsafe for this article, and I'm not. Please, let's start with that proviso. But I'm sharing it with you to make up your own mind, because it's certainly got some very powerful hooks, and it's mind-boggling. It's just a piece of, I don't know what it is. I'm a Chinese citizen in Wuhan who perhaps occupied a high-ranking position in military intelligence at starts. I'm also a member of the Chinese Communist Party, as a senior official near the top of the party. I have access to a great deal of classified information, and I've been involved in many top-secret government projects. I have a doctorate from a leading university in a Western country, which is why I'm able to write my account in English. Let me return to the virus. Last year, large-scale anti-government protests erupted in Hong Kong. The Standing Committee of the Chinese Communist Party considered these to be a grave threat to the integrity and stability of the motherland. The US government and the EU both knew the Chinese were secretly working on a biological agent that was supposed to make the protesters docile and obedient. Without going into detail, I worked on that project. We tried to develop a sort of spray that could be dispersed from helicopters or drones, and that would lead to mental retardation and behavioral change. Naturally, as Hong Kong is one of the most open and international cities in the world, the party decided it was too risky to release the agent in Hong Kong without first testing it. For this, it needed a great number of human guinea pigs. 2 groups were identified for this. First, we rounded up a large number of so-called Islamic radicals in Xinhua province and took them to what we call training camps. This is what I mean about the hooks. We exposed the inmates to various alpha experimental agents. As these were odorless and invisible, the subjects were not aware that they were taking part in medical trials. The resulting high rates of cancer, premature dementia, suicidal depression, and death by organ failure could easily be suppressed, as the camps are located in very remote parts of our motherland. Once the initial experiments had yielded a beta agent, it was transported to Hubei province, where it was deployed in a special military testing facility outside the city of Wuhan. Using social credit scores, which are taken from online activity, electronic shopping behavior, and reports from informers and civil society, we selected some of the worst offenders. Initial results were encouraging. To put it in a more direct Western manner, they started to melt. Death usually occurred through multiple organ failure, and we've seen some videos of multiple organ failure. Death usually occurred through multiple organ failure. It was at this time that I first violated our protocol. One subject, an elderly lady who had published defamatory cartoons of our president, begged me for death with such insistence that I took pity and shot her. I was reprimanded, but fortunately the complaint was dropped when I agreed to reimburse the cost of the bullet. I swore to myself never again to show such unnecessary emotion. Then he says that that basically the agent escaped, and he says that the Americans wanted it handed over in the Wuhan seafood market, and it drops. And actually, I do remember a report about some fracas in that Wuhan seafood market, and I wasn't paying attention to it at the time. This is what I mean. Once we realized that the agent had escaped and would start to spread, we swiftly put all of Wuhan into lockdown. I was one of those tasked to manage the fallout of the contamination. Of course, we could not keep such a huge undertaking secret, so we decided to order our state media to report that a coronavirus had broken out in Wuhan. It was one of my colleagues who came up with the genius idea of pretending that people with the common flu suffered from the coronavirus. That allowed us to hide the true nature of the disease. Let me explain. This explanation is not that compelling. Within a week, there were so many corpses, we did not know what to do with them. So we ordered the surviving social credit prisoners to drive the bodies into the countryside and bury them in mass graves. And then he's talking about Dr. Li Wenliang. He was one of the few doctors who refused falsely to diagnose flu patients with the coronavirus. As a punishment, he was sent to transport dead bodies to mass graves. The expectation was that he would be infected with the agent and die an agonizing death. Around the same time, it became clear that the agent was entirely beyond our control. It was spreading like wildfire throughout Hubei province and beyond, infecting tens of millions and causing them all to die. He says the fatality rate is 100%, but that can't be right because not everyone's dying of it from outside. Hubei province lies in ruins. The various travel restrictions and lockdowns have been imposed were not created to stop the spread of the agent. None of them can stop it. Not embargoes, not face masks or hand sanitizer, but to stop the survivors from seeing the catastrophe with their own eyes. Have you seen how they're blockading people into their homes? Then my superiors sent me to Huoshenshan. I was shown around the installation by a military police officer called Corporal Meng. It was there I saw the truth. Whatever you want to call that place, it's not a hospital. One set of doors, beyond them lay what the corporal called the core. And it was there that I saw it, piles and piles of dead bodies stacked on top of one another all the way to the ceiling. I cannot count how many there were, but it was many, many thousands. And in the midst of the piles of corpses was a kind of path, and I heard a roaring sound in the distance. I simply could not believe what lay at the end of that path in the core. It was an enormous furnace with great fires roaring within. And I'm going to come because there's satellite evidence of this. Of course, the World Health Organization also helped us for a long time. The only issue with the WHO has been that we've been locked in a contest with the Americans about who bribes them more. They released all sorts of sophisticated misinformation about having decoded the DNA of the so-called coronavirus. All this has allowed us to stave off a global panic. If you look at the world news, you will see that Xi Jinping, our president, disappeared for approximately 1 week after the outbreak, before being seen again with the leader of Cambodia. You see the image. You should know that the person who met the Cambodian leader was not President Xi. Certainly doesn't look like him. And even that other one where he's wandering around with his mask on, have a look at that as well. It was a body double who had for many years been trained to look and sound just like our president. Xi, of course, is not careless enough to risk his own death. He is safely ensconced in a secret bunker underneath Zhongnanhai. Do you really think our Prime Minister would risk his life by going to Wuhan? All this means is that our government has become utterly paralyzed and the functions of the state have been taken over by the military. When I was writing about Xi Jinping and his algorithmic control, I said, unless we're now going to Xinhua the whole world, and I was referencing a Haaretz.com article, children are being taken from their parents, are confined in concentration camps and being put in Chinese orphanages. Women in the camps are receiving inoculations that make them infertile. I said the current modus operandi is running on empty, but what's happened here is they've taken that current modus operandi and put it on all these 10% of the world's population. 7th of October, I said how Hong Kong and Taiwan, Xi sees it like a virus, and he's looking to impose a quarantine, just like he has imposed in Xinhua. Joshua Wong said Hong Kong ist das neue Berlin. I also said Xi is seeking to unmask the protesters so he can exercise algorithmic control over them. And that's a delay in the masks because he doesn't want them to hide. And I said the periphery requires a lot more finesse than more blunt force. China unveiling a digital panopticon in Xinjiang, strike hard campaign, stability, maintenance, enduring peace. This is now rebounding on the rest of China. I wish first they came for the Uyghurs trope were not coming true. Medical metaphor, thought virus has become medical reality. States' favorite tools of tech, confinement and control over individuals. Takes me to William Burroughs. A paranoid is someone who knows a little of what's going on. Malcolm Gladwell, a tipping point is a moment in an epidemic when a virus reaches critical mass. It's the boiling point. It's the moment on the graph when the line starts to shoot straight upwards. This was from Intel.wave. Current SO2 levels are extremely elevated to the point about a furnace. This is Huoshenshan Hospital, which is now flooded. Have a look at these photos of Xi when he was wandering around with his face mask and when he met the Cambodian president. He certainly doesn't look like him. Xi, of course, is not careless enough to risk his own death. He's safely ensconced in a secret bunker. From that article. So look, I'm not vouching for it, I'm just making a few points. Okay, let's move on. Currency markets, euro dollar 108.38, dollar index 99.113, Japanese yen 109.84, very weak GDP numbers. Swiss franc 0.9823, the pound 130.41, the Australian dollar 0.6729, India rupee 71.441, South Korean won 1182.43, the Rial 429.64, so it's firmed up off a record low. Egyptian pound, second or third best performing currency in the world, 15.6875. The Rand 14.8565. I think that's going to 15.50. Dollar index, this chart is from FX Pip Titan, looks well underpinned. Euro dollar parity is calling once more, I feel. Another chart from FX Pip Titan. Commodity markets, crude oil, had a little bit of, bouncing again, 52.40. Emerging markets, irregularities found at Pakistan's top bank after US sanction. New York's banking regulator fined the Karachi-based bank for weak anti-money laundering controls and sanctions compliance and ordered it to surrender its license, effectively removing the lender from the US financial system. They basically opened an account for Zuma's son. Preliminary reports said Duduzane Zuma's account at Habib Bank was opened in June 2016 and involved a waiver of proof of income statement closely associated with the Guptas. Mufti said banks are allowed to deal with PEPs provided the right processes are followed. Habib Bank, this is the share price, has really underperformed, currently focused on building up its operations to tap more business under President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. Let's come to Africa. Aki Nadesina, the president of the African Development Bank, has been in a very vocal spat with David Malpass of the World Bank. It says, against all odds, Africa will thrive. Secretary Pompeo is making his first trip to Africa in a bid to reassert US as a leading partner. After nearly 22 months in office, Mike Pompeo will make his first trip to sub-Saharan Africa on Saturday in a bid to reassert the US as the leading partner to the world's youngest and likely to be most populous continent amid strong Chinese influence and a growing Russian presence. It's the lack of attention that's been paid. It's the fact that former National Security Advisor John Bolton rolled out this Africa strategy 14 months ago. And since then, very little has been accomplished where many other nations have moved forward. African officials are willing to look past and eager for increased US investment, especially as an alternative to Chinese financing, with its excessive amounts of credit tied to steep interest rates and a high risk of forfeiture. This reports in the ABC. Just last Saturday, he warned China is always working for you, working the team around you in a speech to US governors. Trump may host African leaders for a US-Africa summit in Washington, co-hosted by South Africa, according to Lana Marks, the US ambassador to Pretoria and a close Trump friend. Overall, the budget proposal slashes assistance to Africa by 39%, or $3.23 billion, and funding for key health programs in Africa, like the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, which could see a 26% cut. There is a similar contradiction in the administration's military posture across the continent. Pentagon is currently reviewing whether to slash its troop presence in West Africa. Mabaya said any cuts to troop totals in the Sahel would be very, very worrisome. As I said previously, in fact, from the Maghreb to the Sahel to the Horn of Africa, we're witnessing a surge in asymmetric warfare. Bill Gates stepped up and stepped into this whole coronavirus debate, says this disease, when it comes to Africa, will be more dramatic than in China, and I don't want to play down what is happening in China, he said. 27th of January, I said Bill Gates kept telling us a pandemic was coming. In October 2019, he ran a simulation of a coronavirus pandemic. Just 3 months later, the real coronavirus pandemic begins. That was in a Business Insider. Thinks a coming disease would kill 30 million within 6 months, presented a simulation by the Institute for Disease Modeling that found a new flu like the one that killed 50 million in the 1918 pandemic would now most likely kill 30 million within 6 months. He's warning of 10 million deaths as virus spreads to Africa. This is a huge challenge. We've always known the potential for a naturally caused or intentionally caused, he says, pandemic is one of the few things that could disrupt health systems and economies and cause more than 10 million excess deaths. Ebola is terrible, but it's not like a lightning flu, he said. If you look at Ebola, most of the excess deaths were caused because the health service shut down. It's not just the direct effect, it's also the panic, the overload, and the things that affect health workers, because you've already at very limited capacity. This disease, if it's in Africa, it's more dramatic than if it's in China, even though I'm not trying to minimize what's going on in China in any way. Listen to the video very, very carefully. He says either naturally caused or intentionally caused. That's via Elizabeth Subrawan. As I said on the 27th of January, I have to assume that the coronavirus is already in Africa, but just not diagnosed. That's a racing certainty. Within Africa, Egypt, South Africa, Ethiopia, Mauritius, Morocco, Nigeria, and Kenya topped the countries at risk. That was from the modeling of travel via the University of Southampton's World Population Project. 3rd of February, I said Ebola is the epicenter of China-Africa hyper-connectedness. Zero hedge, this could mean super spreaders during incubation period, undetected by temperature readings or showing no symptoms, likely invaded Africa from China via Ethiopia's main airport. As we detailed previously, Ethiopia's Bole International Airport is the leading African gateway to and from China. On average, 1,500 passengers per day arrive from China. Ethiopia scans all passengers from Asia for symptoms, which essentially means taking their temperature. And I said, in hindsight, it won't look clever to have dragged 55 African heads of state. There weren't 55, a couple dropped out. European President Trudeau, Guterres, Norwegian PM, and their gigantic delegations. Ethiopia is to hold its parliamentary elections on August 29. As I said previously, Prime Minister Abiy has a fiendishly complicated task fending off the centripetal forces which are tearing Ethiopia apart. South African All Shares up 1.36% year-to-date, dollar rand at 14.86, Egyptian pound at 15.67, EGX30 down 1.61% year to date. Nigerian All Share up 3.4% so far this year. Ghana Stock Exchange down 2.37%. Sauti Zu Busara, Zanzibar's world-famous music festival, is in Stone Town, Zanzibar, finished I think on Sunday. It really is extraordinary. I really one day want to go there. I've been once. And I had lots of nice food at Forodani Gardens. This is a photograph of the Zanzibar sunset by Hey Hey Blinky. Sea level rise, West Africa sinking. The western coast of Africa, stretching more than 6,500 kilometers from Mauritius to Cameroon, is in peril. Caused by global warming, rising sea levels are causing massive erosion, in some places eating away more than 30 meters of land in a single year. Recent World Bank study shows that flooding and coastal erosion due to sea level rise cost the region about $3.8 billion and caused 13,000 deaths in just 1 year. US Africa Command says it recently conducted a B-52 bomber training mission in East Africa. It would be a first for the region. Then there's a tweet from US Africa Command: in concert with partners, a B-52 training mission occurred in East Africa. That's stepping things up. Big time. Nairobi All Share is down 2.43% this year, and the NSE20 is down 3.59% this year. Thank you for listening.